Does Europe need a security boost on its border with Russia? Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland are requesting additional funds for a so-called Eastern Shield, looking to build more bunkers, barriers, and military installations along the border with Belarus and Russia. But is the Baltic Defence Line necessary security or an expensive provocation? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Europe's Eastern Shield. Well before Russia invaded Ukraine, tensions between Moscow and the Baltic states were rising. After decades of Soviet occupation, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania were eager to renationalize their populations, some say at the expense of large Russian-speaking minorities who'd lived there for generations. Now, the policy set the Baltics and other former Soviet states on a collision course with Moscow. And in the case of Ukraine, it culminated in the shock 2022 invasion. Now, the Baltic states and Poland are worried the same could happen to them, and they're asking for billions of dollars in fresh EU funding to beef up their borders with Russia and Belarus. But is it necessary? Or is it further damaging an already fragile relationship? Here's a look.
As fear of Russia grows, Eastern European nations want to beef up their defences. The three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, along with Poland, are calling for upgraded military infrastructure to be built along their eastern border. And what's more, they want the European Union to fund it. All four states are members of NATO as well as the EU.
We must ensure that the global order remains resilient in the face of aggression, especially when the aggressor is a nuclear weapon state and a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Russia tries to tear down what has been built by all of us. Russia tries to rearrange the international system that only benefit aggressors. Having endured 50 years of Soviet occupation, Latvia deeply understands the value of freedom and independence.
The states envisage substantial new fortifications, including bunkers, barriers and warehouses along their frontier with Russia and its ally, Belarus. The border is 700 kilometers long and the terrain largely flat, making it more vulnerable to a land invasion. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has made other European states even more wary of Moscow's expansionist tendencies. That is especially true in the case of the Baltic countries, which are part of the USSR and have a history dominated by Russia. Poland, though nominally independent in the Cold War, was a socialist country and inside the Soviet bloc. Russia, for its part, has denied that it wants war with NATO member states and instead claims that it is a victim of the expansion of the alliance and its hostility toward Moscow.
I also heard Biden saying something similar, warning that if Ukraine loses the war, then Russia will march on the Baltic states, on Finland, and on other NATO members. Such statements were also made by lower-level leaders, not just by US leaders. You see, I'm inclined to believe in reason, in the reasonableness of the US leadership. So I see this as an attempt to achieve short-term objectives, that is, allocating funds to Ukraine, dispersing funds to Ukraine. They think that they can instill fear in the Congress with these fairy tales, with these concoctions.
The foreign ministers of the Baltic states and Poland argue that the defensive line is necessary not only to protect them individually, but the European Union as a whole. The project will be expensive, costing more than $2.6 billion according to some estimates. It will also take time to complete. Estonia expects to commence construction of its own fortifications in 2025 and to proceed in 3 stages. Poland does not expect its own defences to be ready until 2028. In the meantime, Russia continues its assault on Ukraine and tensions with NATO remain high. Time is of the essence if these new defences are to make a difference.
So is a new line of defense really necessary? And is it more defense or more agitating to an already tense situation? Joining me now to debate that and more are with me in the studio political analyst and journalist James Jackson. From Strasbourg, member of European Parliament, from Poland's Law and Justice Party, Dominik Tarczynski, and from Moscow, lead expert at the Center for Actual Politics, Viktor Olevich. Thanks all so much for being with me. Dominik, I'll start with you. For Poland, you know, many like you believe time really is of the essence and that whatever the cost, this Eastern Shield is necessary. Why?
Well, basically, history is very clear about it, and I think history is the answer for your question. You have to remember what happened, let's say, in 2004, 2014, 2008. I mean, Russia attacked Georgia. It's very, very famous speech from late Polish President Kaczynski, who was killed in plane crash in Smolensk. He, in 2008, our president, he said very famous words: now Georgia, next Baltic states, next Ukraine, and next Poland. So he was very prophetic. He says, now Georgia, next Ukraine, then Baltic states, and then Poland. So if you look throughout, let's say, last 20 years, I'm not going to go back to KGB career, Putin's career. When you see 2004, 2008, attacks on Georgia, Ossetia, now Ukraine, it's obvious, very, very sad, but obvious that Baltic states might be next and Poland might be next. So that's very clear that we have to protect ourselves watching what is happening now. So It's not us who are trying to provoke or be kind of nervous. It's what is happening now.
Okay,
that's our reaction.
Yeah. Viktor, I mean, obviously Dominik is saying Russia has a track record, and you're also familiar with the argument that says Putin said he would not invade Ukraine, and then he did, and now he says he won't invade the Baltics, but need they be ready in case he changes his mind again?
Look, Russia has no intention of invading or attacking Poland or the three Baltic states. These four countries are members of NATO, have been members of NATO for years. It is clear to everyone that what the NATO Charter states, particularly its Article 5, Moscow understands full well that a war with these countries would mean war with NATO, and neither side, Moscow or Washington or the Europeans, nobody really wants direct confrontation, because it is quite clear that direct confrontation between Russia and NATO could have catastrophic escalatory consequences. It could go very fast from regular warfare to nuclear warfare, and there can be no winners in a nuclear conflict. So essentially, neither side really wants direct confrontation, but there are several situations where Russia could do that. And those situations are as follows. If Poland or the Baltic states or both engage in direct confrontation with Russia, if they send troops to Ukraine to fight against the Russian army, of course that could escalate into direct confrontation. Also, if Poland and Lithuania, for example, attempt to blockade the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad and block Russian logistics and transportation between Kaliningrad and other Russian regions, that could escalate into direct warfare. If the Baltic states and Poland engage in attempting to block Russian shipping in the Baltics, in the Baltic Sea, that could escalate into direct warfare.
If I may,
However,
one sentence,
at this
if I
point,
may.
neither side is interested in doing that.
Okay. Hold on, Dominik. I really would like to get James into the discussion there, because it's interesting to hear Viktor lay out pretty specific conditions that right now seem very far off, let's put it this way, in most people's minds. Yeah, maybe not so much, but I mean, in which case, you've heard both cases laid out from Poland and from Russia there. I mean, is Poland what, being paranoid? And is there potential here for that paranoia to escalate what is already a dangerous situation in the region?
I agree with you. The region is very tense. It's a powder keg within Europe because we have, especially as Viktor mentioned, the exclave of Kaliningrad. So Russia, it's part of Russia's territory under international law, but Russia also has the right to move things there. And Viktor has just indicated they see any kind of infringement on even transport links there as a possible escalation. So on the one hand, we have Article 5, which is supposed to make deterrence. It's supposed to act as a deterrent to stop war. But we've seen throughout history, as the colleague from the Law and Justice Party has said, that Russia doesn't always confront directly. They have what's called a salami tactic. So they take off a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and what's to stop a drone from flying into Poland? Or we've seen missiles landing in Poland, and that doesn't trigger Article 5. So I think Putin is very strategic on these issues, and he'll try to test the West's buttons and weaknesses and defences without going for a full-on escalation. And so actually, all of these defence measures could be necessary, but the most important thing is that they are there to deter Russian invasion. They're not there to provoke it, in my view. We're talking about defensive structures that would stop Russian tanks and Russian troops. We're not talking about missiles that could be aimed at Moscow. So I think that's a really crucial difference.
Right, but it's interesting to hear the very specific conditions that again, Viktor was laying out. What is your feeling toward any of those conditions even accidentally being met?
I mean, of course, accidents do happen in the field of war. There's been many cases of, nuclear submarines entering the wrong part, or pieces of European infrastructure being destroyed by possibly Russian saboteurs. Does that lead to a nuclear confrontation? I don't think so. So I feel like Russia is sometimes looking for an excuse to press buttons and to probe for weaknesses and to find the weak spot within the transatlantic alliance. Because, staying united against a very formidable threat like Russia is not an easy case in such a diverse political landscape as the EU, where pro-Russian populists are making gains all across the continent.
Okay, I can hear you agree there, Dominik. Go ahead.
Well, yes, I do agree, because excuse is the way to attack. I'd like to reply to Viktor and what he said. He's trying to put Russia in a position of the country which is in danger. Russia is not attacked and never been attacked by Ossetia, by Georgia, by Ukraine, or by Poland. No one ever stopped any transportation. There was not even one attempt. So these arguments are kind of excuse to use force in the future. And when you see history, again, it's not only the track record from last 20 years. When you see 17th, 18th century partitions, Poland was not on the map for 123 years because of Russia. Then when you see Second World War, you have to remember that on the 1st of September, Poland was attacked by Germany. 16 days later, on 17, Russia attacked Poland based on Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. So throughout the history, Russia was an aggressor, not Poland, not Ukraine, not others. So they are trying to use excuses. And like, let's say the wall or the extra protection on the border, it's not only about tanks. Now Putin is using hybrid war. He's using illegal migrants to destabilize Poland. We can see this on Belarus and Polish border when illegals from Africa, Asia, and other places coming to Russia, getting tourists visas, moving to Belarus, and they attacked Polish border. That's why we had to build the wall. Mr. Trump was great inspiration, and now we are safer. So do not be surprised. We see the history. We can see Ukraine now. We can see passport with Russian visas with the people from Africa or Asia. So this is what is happening now. We can't be blind.
But let me ask Viktor, though, because Russia has not seen the issue as it necessarily being directly attacked by NATO or by former Soviet states, but that their ethnic Russian populations within those states have been discriminated against, marginalized, and threatened, especially in the case of Ukraine. This is why Russia claims they need to denazify eastern Ukraine. So is that Russia's only defense here for threatening former Soviet states in this way?
But Hitler
No, hold on.
used the
Let
same
me
argument.
let Viktor answer quickly. Go ahead, Viktor.
Well, first of all, Russia is not, I repeat, not threatening Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia with military action. It is not threatening them with military attack or any sort of aggression. When we talk about Russia's position, it's important to note that at the end of the 1980s, the Warsaw Pact, that was essentially headed by the then Soviet Union, was dissolved. On the other hand, the military alliance that opposed the Warsaw Pact, NATO, was not dissolved. Not only was it not dissolved, but it expanded to the east, closer and closer to the Russian border, despite Russian objections. And those objections were voiced not only under Putin, but they were really voiced for years under his predecessor, under Yeltsin. However, the United States and its allies did nothing to allay Russia's fears of NATO's expansion to the east and NATO's expansion right up to Russia's borders. If we look at the way that, for example, the United States treats its neighbors, what do you really think would happen if there was a coup or a change of power in Canada and pro-Russian forces would come to power there? What do you think the American generals would think or do?
Business. So it's not about threats. It's about your complexes.
Please let me speak.
Complexes.
I did not interrupt you. I understand you are very emotional, but please let me speak. In 1983, when a Marxist regime came to power in Grenada, in the Western Hemisphere, what did the United States do? Under the pretense of having American exchange students being persecuted there, the US military came in and they removed the Marxist government in Grenada.
Okay.
That's what the United States would do in that situation.
And Viktor, in that scenario,
great powers.
In that scenario, it didn't end well. So if Russia can have the same parallel situation today, that's a very foreboding comparison to draw, actually. If you don't mind, let me get James back into this. I mean, at one point we heard Russia saying, we've never attacked anyone, we have no interest in going to war with any of our neighbors here, but then saying, see, we can claim that we've been provoked in the similar way as historically the United States maybe was, and that would justify further military action. I mean, can you have it both ways?
Well, yeah, I'm not quite sure what Viktor's getting at, because I don't think two rights make a wrong in this situation, do they? You can say that the US invasion of Grenada was, a breach of a sovereign country's rule of law and right to exist under international law, while also saying that Russia's done the same and on a much bigger scale, as we see right now in Ukraine, which is one of the biggest threats to the European continent that we've seen in decades. So I'm not really convinced that Russia is playing fair with these arguments, especially when it comes to Russian minorities in other countries, Russian-speaking minorities in other countries, and of course in the Baltics, where there are quite a few. Many of them actually feel quite alienated from Moscow and have distanced themselves from the Russian state, and yet still experience, it has to be said, degrees of discrimination by the local governments, which have become more proud members of the West. So I'm not sure what Viktor's getting at. I think, we do have to be worried in Europe about what Russia's going to do, because they've shown through the invasion of Ukraine that they don't respect international law and that their words can't be trusted, because Putin promised he wouldn't invade right until he did. So how are we supposed to treat these people as negotiating partners?
Okay. Dominik, if you can just hold off for 1 second, because I have to get Viktor's response to that. I mean, you heard directly from James why Russia is in the wrong here. He is an analyst in this situation. How do you defend?
Look, in international affairs, there are actions and reactions. They stem from the way various powers, great powers and smaller ones, see their national interests. The reason I compared the situation to the United States invasion of Grenada was because the United States saw the Western Hemisphere during the last Cold War as its sphere of influence. And Russia sees Ukraine, for example, as part of its sphere of influence. And it said for a number of years that it will not allow NATO to incorporate Ukraine within its structure.
Why
Putin
not?
Has
They are a
said
sovereignty
so
country. They're a free country. Why not? Victor, hello, one minute.
One can
Why
agree.
not? Why not? They are free people. They are
For the
sovereign
same
country.
reason. Right, and
You don't own
Grenada was a free
Ukraine.
country too. You know, all countries are free, but some countries are more equal than others, right? Russia,
No.
China, and the United States are somewhat more equal than some smaller countries. You can think it's fair, or maybe it's not fair, but that's the way it has been throughout history. 50 years
Throughout
ago,
history,
100 years ago, and so
you
forth.
are the one
Great
who
powers
is
have changed.
responsible for partitions. You are responsible for communism. You are responsible for starting the World War II, attacking Poland on 17th century. You are on 17th of September. You are responsible for Katyn, for murdering 25,000 Polish officers. You are responsible for Ossetia. You are responsible for Ukraine. You are responsible for hybrid war with illegal migrants. This is Russia.
Okay,
and
so
this is the
Dominik,
point.
then you're saying that these former Soviet states...
I am sure.
Sorry, these former Soviet states, Dominik, including
sure
Poland, have a right to be, you can call it paranoia, or particularly, I guess, defensive against anything Russia does because of the history. But Viktor is saying Russia, because of its position in power, is only behaving the way any power, great power, should, because it feels threatened by the unnecessary expansion of NATO, for example, and the constant, it feels obviously aggrieved, thinking that the West is against it, as the West actually says in several cases that it is, that it sees Russia as a threat and it will act accordingly.
Well, all these excuses from Viktor are just excuses. I'm trying to repeat the history. It's very important, because when you can't see the big picture, you are very focused on, oh, he says that, he did that. Centuries of history of the world shows that Russia was an aggressor. Viktor said Russia never attacked anyone. Are you serious? I will repeat. Partitions, Russia.
I never said that.
Second World War, Russia. I will repeat because you don't want to hear that. Communism, Russia. Ossetia, Russia. Georgia, Russia. Ukraine, Russia. And we can go on and on and on. The problem of Putin's way of thinking is that he's full of complexes. America did that. Just stay away from our borders. Don't send illegal migrants. Do not change the history. In your schools, you teach that Second World War started in 1941. What about September 1939 when you attacked Poland? You forgot about nearly 2 years. So they changed the history. They manipulate with the facts. But the facts are Russia was an aggressor throughout the ages.
Okay.
That's why we do have a right to protect ourselves. No one ever attacked you. You did not have Polish missiles reaching Russian territory. We had it a couple of times recently.
Okay.
We did not react. We are patient. So do not give me these arguments that America did something. So let's take Georgia, Ossetia,
Okay, Viktor,
Ukraine,
very
and then
quickly,
Baltic.
we're down to our last few minutes. Go ahead, Viktor, and then let me get James in. Go ahead. Very quickly, please.
Look, the argument that nobody ever attacked Russia is nonsensical. The Germans and their allies attacked Russia in World War II in 1941.
I'm talking about the times after
there were
World
a number
War II.
of
You know
other
that.
invaders who
Okay.
starting from the Teutonic Knights to the others. But this is not about non-ending listing of grievances. We can all sides can list grievances probably for hours and for weeks. That changes nothing. The important issue here is, instead of arguing to de-escalate this powder keg in the middle of Europe and to start real negotiations about ending this conflict, and that's only possible if the concerns of all sides are addressed during these negotiations.
Okay, let me just get James' final analysis here. I mean, historically, everyone seems to feel they have an absolute reason to feel aggrieved and to feel threatened in this situation. How can anything be de-escalated if these are the positions?
I think that's the right question. You know, what we've heard so far is mostly a litany of historical grievances on both sides, and to the most part quite understandable. But in politics, we're trying to deal with what to do next and how things should work in the future. So we're trying to plan for the future, and the question is, will these defences make Europe more secure, or will they provoke the situation? I think because they're defensive, they will help Europe to be more secure and to deter a Russian invasion. However, we have to listen also when Russia is ready, whether they are a negotiating partner. But I don't unfortunately see that as a possibility at the moment, because they have refused to de-escalate in Ukraine. Why should the emphasis always be on the West to de-escalate when Russia is the power which has its troops and its missiles in a foreign country, a sovereign country?
Okay, James, that will very unfortunately have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank sincerely all three of you for being with me. Great to hear everyone's perspective. Unfortunately, a rather foreboding outlook, but thanks to our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.